All right, today I'm here with Joshua Michael Wenner, co-founder of K4 Men's Work. And today we're going to talk about some of the intersections and some of the differences between what's considered men's work and what is, I would call, the broader men's movement. And I thought it was an interesting conversation to have. And so I kind of scheduled this special edition of my old podcast to bring it up and work through it. So Joshua, thanks for coming on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. Great. Glad to be here with you. And I think it's a valid discussion because it's definitely a movement happening. And there's some fundamentals on men's work that I think people can understand the difference of what's just in the movement where people are just popping up and what are some fundamental pieces of men's work that are important to know.
Yeah. Like I was saying, just before we got on here, I was in Cancun with a bunch of men's speakers and so forth recently. And it was actually an Orthodox priest who had been in different parts of the men's movement for many, many, many years. And they started talking about men's work. And I don't think I had ever realized that there's kind of a difference between men's work and, what I consider what I do more is men's movement, because I think really the broader men's movement, which also I think is a terrible, it sucks that it's this derivative name. Mm-hmm. Like you have the manosphere, and the manosphere is really, I'm old enough to remember how that got named. And, they used to call things the blogosphere when everyone was blogging. And then the manosphere became a division of the blogosphere. And so it was just a collection of blogs. And now it's kind of still called the manosphere, even though nobody blogs anymore, really. And so it's kind of this outdated term. And then there's the men's movement, which started earlier, but the men's movement is really just a reaction to the women's movement. And that's why it's called that. And that kind of reactionary, like, let's mimic the women's movement seems a little counterproductive and silly, because we're talking about something that has been around before the 1960s. We're talking about, men talking about masculinity, and just being men obviously is eternal. And so it makes it sound like it's a new wave thing, when really it's a very old wave thing, So why don't you tell me a little bit about K4 Men's Work and what that is?
Yeah, so K4 Men's Work is started between me and my co-founder, Philip Folsom. And really, we initially started it because he'd been in men's work longer than I'd had. I've only been in about a decade. He'd been in it for the first movement, which sounds like either you or the other gentleman you were talking about before was around for. So he saw it rise, was a part of it, and then watched it die. And so had some, observations of why it died. And he'd been running his own men's circles since then, just to hold space for it. And so we initially got in to say, hey, what do we need? This needs to be here. We didn't on kind of creating a whole community with it. We just initially said, here's the fundamentals that we believe are going to make us better initially. And how do we, teach the concepts and create accountability in an honor-based culture in order to make this happen? And so we initially created in LA as just a local get-together where men showed up. It started as a house around a fire pit, moved to a much larger, kind of a cool chapel, a building that we found that was kind of an old, ancient-looking chapel. Nice. And then when COVID happened, we had to stop the in-persons, and it turned into more this online movement, which initially we just kind of dismissed the online a little bit at first because there's so much value from in-person. Right. But after getting together and seeing that would work, we've now created a whole scalable model around online as the primary. And then we do get-togethers in person. We have strongholds in different markets, as well as events and different things. So in general, K4 stands for King of the Four Houses. Okay. And the primary function is those four masculine archetypes of the king, lover, warrior, magician. Right. Our mindset is, how do we work on learning how to use those for any environment that shows up? That's kind of the foundation to get better. So the translation is, how do you get better in your health and fitness? How do you get better in your relationship quadrant? How do you get better in your career? And how do you get better in your finances? Is how we translate those four houses into relevant modern day application.
Interesting. All right. And so again, with some of the differences, obviously, I think the men's movement, the bigger thing is, there's a lot of political it's actually the right word, but not with what people think that means. Everything's political in this weird way, but, interpersonal dynamics are political. But I think, there's this whole different, level of things where people were talking about concepts of masculinity, and they're talking about also, this interaction with popular culture. Like criticizing the way popular culture handles masculinity and talks about it, and so forth, and the way that politicians like legislate around it, and psychologists and all this stuff. But for men's work, I would say, and you may disagree or agree, and we can talk about it. I mean, that's more based on working with men directly, to rather than talking about the big picture. It's more, we're almost some micro, and it seems like actually helping men work through their problems.
Yeah, I would say men's work is theory and application, versus the movement could be, looking at men from a macro perspective and what we're doing as a culture, versus I'd say men's work is taking time-tested practical application, taking what worked in the past, making it relevant, and then working on application to actually get results in your life now. And bringing back age-old concepts. I kind of see that big distinction. I'd say one other piece, and it's cool. My business partner, Philip's an anthropologist, so studies the history of people. So a lot of what we've looked at is what was missing is this rite of passage. And that's kind of where we've built our foundation around, is like men used to have a rite of passage, like in tribes. It was very much a part of the tribe where you were taken from the mom around 13. The men were taken from the fathers, and you were with the men for about 18 to 24 months. And you went on hunting, and you got to spend time around all the men. And you learned how do men give each other a hard time, how do men joke and play. And they would bring stories, and they would use the stories to teach you, here's what it means to be a man, in essentially the different aspects of masculinity over that period of time. And then you were given a clear rite of passage where they knocked out a tooth, or you went on a hunt, and something that signified you transitioned from an adolescent to now an adult, and you earned that amongst the men and your brothers. And then you came back to the women, and everybody recognized you now as a man. So that was a clear transitional place that we went to. Industrial revolution came, all the men went to work. And then during that time, we lost essentially the rite of passage. And so a lot of times the men or the boys would learn what it was like to be a man through the lens of the woman, and what she liked or disliked about masculinity. And you only got little glimpses of your father, typically when he was tired, angry at the end of the day. And so that's what we get like now, the stigma around masculinity or the man was that long multi-generations of losing a core rite of passage process, and how we just learned to adapt as men. And so that's a big part of what we're wanting to bring back, is what were those foundational practices that we had in tribes? Where did we lose them, and how do we make them relevant today in the world we live in? And how do we bring those back? And how do we bring our take on what those stories are through traditional men's work, books and practical application, and bring those back modern day? And I think, and I'm curious to see your perspective on this too, what we found is missing is it's really hard to find an example of like a powerful and good men. Like a lot of times you look in society, we've been shown you're a good man and anemic and get walked on and weak, or you're a powerful man and we're more what they'd say is like the toxic man, but he's powerful. So a lot of times in society, we're more taught, choose. Are you the good guy that gets walked on and you're weak, or are you the strong man that maybe looks at as a little bit more toxic? So we're saying, how do you bring both? How do you have a well-rounded man that is strong in his values, strong in his ideals, and then what we look at as power is like radically authentic. He owns his power, he owns who he is, has viewpoints, has a code he lives by. Like, how do you kind of merge those two? And it doesn't seem like we have a lot of examples of that. If you look at society, it's not like tons of both powerful and good men. It's kind of like, you're seeing little slivers of it. And at least our take is it's because we're missing that rite of passage for multiple generations.
Right. There's two pieces there that I want to talk on. Hopefully I don't lose my track of my thoughts here. But, one is that I think one of the reasons why we don't have those rites of passages anymore is, in a tribe, the kind of thing, because I've done a lot of study in that area too. In a tribe, I mean, those guys that you have that rate of initiation with are also probably the people that you've grown up around. And your tribe has a very specific idea about what masculinity is and what that role is that you're being initiated into. And what we have in contemporary society is there's no clear consensus on what that role is. So it's like, well, you're being initiated, but into this group, and where's this group, and what like it's very clearly defined. People do like rules, as we found over the past few years, but people just they want a framework. for their life to a certain extent. And that's what you were initiated into. In many cases, here's what an adult man is. Here's what his responsibilities are. Here's, the way he behaves. And that's going to be, all the little pieces of that are different for every little tribe. This is how the guys in our tribe do this particular thing. And that's just specifically cultural, and so it becomes, we have all these people. I mean, I'm talking about moving or, that move all around. And so their culture is changing constantly. And then there's also no consensus. You don't go to, if I, went to Texas, well, I don't know. Texas is actually probably a better example of like a place where there's a very clear idea of what masculinity is. But, in a lot of places there isn't, it's not like you go to that city and this is how we do it here. It's, and so it's all these different little tribes and communities, and you kind of have to find your way into one or the other. And it's what makes it confusing, I think, for a lot of people. And it's easy to be in a place where I just make up my own rules. And I make up my own culture of masculinity. And as I'm a very Nietzschean kind of guy, I kind of do that myself, but that there's a trap in that. And the trap is that if there is no culture and there is no established rules and there is no accountability, then you have a situation where it's really easy to imagine that you're awesome and that you're not doing anything wrong when you actually are. And also, to give yourself a pass, like you can change the rules whenever you want. And that's kind of a problem, because especially smart people, like I'm middlingly smart, but I'm not a genius, but I do all right. And we're great, really articulate people are really good at rationalizing whatever they want to rationalize, because we can argue it out with ourselves and win. I'm doing a great job at like, okay, this is why this needs to happen, not because I'm afraid of it, or not because I'm trying to do that now with whether or not I should move because I got robbed, and I'm like, am I having emotional reaction to this, and am I just like, see ya, and is it really a smart move, or am I just stuck in that wave of that? And so a lot of people aren't as introspective as that. And so they just kind of react, and you have to work through that. And that's why peers are helpful, because some guy could tell you, why are you doing that, dude? Like, why are you really doing that? And that's why it's good to have those guys around. And go ahead.
And I think you bring up a really relevant topic. What we've been able to translate is we moved from two clear examples. We use the metaphor prince to king, but it's really talking about adolescent, adult, and that is also rite of passage, the clear marker going from where we were an adolescent, now we're an adult. And so we look for different markers to give us an example of where we're at. And so on your position of tribe, that's exactly it. Like, I was a lone wolf for most of my life, and so was my business partner, and most of us are, because we've been taught every movie, everything culture, you don't see the man in tribe, you see the man as a, like Batman or any of these movies, he's a solo man on his own solo mission. And so we've seen that example. But one of our markers is actually having healthy tribe, where you now have community, and exactly what you're saying, you get pushed back against. And I think one of the things we're trying to bring back is an honor-based culture. I grew up around athletics and military and different cultures where they have an honor-based culture, but then you have the rest of the world that's like on a pride base. So we look at pride base is more self-focused, honor base is service-focused. So how do you create your own tribe, which is willing to serve first, meaning they're going to challenge you. Like you're saying, they're going to say, hey, where you at? Is this going to serve you at a high level? And they're going to challenge you to get, which we look at as accountability, versus I'd say a pride-based culture looks as challenge as shame. And it's a really tricky, especially for men. I'm just out in general. Somebody gives me shit. Are they just challenging me? Are they shaming me? We're going to fight, or something's going to happen. If I'm in an honor culture and they challenge me to say, hey, this could be an old pattern. Like you're saying, hey, is this emotional reaction? Is this, I'm like, oh, thank you for challenging me, because it's holding me to more accountability. So I'd say we need tribe as one of the factors. And that's where men's work brings back is healthy community, healthy tribe, right? It's like bringing it back to service. That's how like we go on this journey of men's work to then bring it home is one of our markers. And I think tribe is an example of, oh, I'm coming home again because I have tribe and community now.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think that public and private challenge too, that's kind of the struggle. I mean, I've been saying for years, and it's something I have to do as well and work on, is a lot of men in modern life actually don't have very many friends.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the way society is designed. Like you're not supposed to have very many friends, and you don't have, especially if they get married or whatever, then their woman takes up all their time. They don't make any times for themselves. They lose all their friends slowly, and then they become loner characters, and they're in a very lonely place. Mm-hmm. So we all have to kind of work on that, like to reach out to guys like that and find that thing. But one of the struggles is that, and I think this is a feature, not a bug, is that men take a long time to mm-hmm. build good friendships. Mm-hmm. And it's because we know each other, we know who we are, and we are suspicious. Mm-hmm. And I think that's healthy. Mm-hmm. That a lot of, like a lot of the women thinking and mainstream thinking of that is like, you're supposed to just trust everyone and just open yourself up all the time and whatever. But I think men are wary of that from a tactical standpoint. Like, I don't tell you what my problems are, mm-hmm. stranger person. Like I want to watch you for like a year and see if I even like you. Exactly. And it takes a while to like really insert yourself into that's a bad term, but really to put yourself in a men's group and really to have them be at a point where like you're one of the gang and you're trusted and they trust you, and then you can have that conversation, mm-hmm. that like pushback conversation. But I don't want to have that with a stranger. Mm-hmm. And people don't understand this. I even get it because being an online person or whatever, I don't want criticism from strangers. I know that that's the online culture, is that you're supposed to do that, but that is usually not valuable, mm-hmm. to me, because I don't know who you are. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know where that criticism is coming from and what your motivations are, and whether you are trying to hurt me or you're trying, I just don't know what your credentials are for, like judging me. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, sometimes it's helpful. Sometimes some people say something and you're like, oh yeah, I got to work on that. But very rare. I mean, I've definitely had that. I've had like some, a mean YouTube comment or something where I'm like, it gets in my head just enough. I'm like, oh, I need to make sure I don't get that comment again. Because that bugs me too. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times it's just weird jealousy or weird mm-hmm. Reactions, and it's not sincere. Mm-hmm. I want that response from someone who actually wants me to be successful. Mm-hmm. And not someone who, and even that's tricky, even in groups. I mean, because a few years ago, I joined a group and it was not the right group, but like I said, everything's political to a certain extent. And sometimes people will, this is a terrible personal quote, but in one of the Hannibal Lecter movies, he says a bit like, people don't always tell you what they're thinking. They just make sure that you don't advance in life. And and it's always stuck in my head, and because people will be like, yeah, good job, like yeah, all right, and really be thinking you're going down. Like, so it's a struggle, and like I said, you have to build that trust, and it brought me back to what your original question was there about what I call in the way of man, and a lot of guys are familiar with it, is, I made a distinction. There's a difference between being a good man and being good at being a man. And that's kind of what you were talking about as well. Like, ideally you want both. You want a good man who is also good at being a man. And America has this very strange kind of jock nerd culture. And it goes through that as well, like the discussion that we're having as well, where you're one or the other. And it's really sad because it breaks up parts of the whole. I mean, in the sense of, I'm going to talk about it in a few months. I'm going to give a talk having to do with culture. And it's the same thing. Like, men who are good at being men aren't supposed to have any culture. They're supposed to have beer and, like whiskey and like whatever kind of music their friend groups listen to. And not care about their appearance, not care about art, not care about anything, any finer aspect of life, not care about, they don't read, you know, there's this stereotype of what you're supposed to be if you're really a man. And it's so weird because men wrote, up until very recently, men wrote all the poetry, painted all the paintings, built all the beautiful buildings. Men did all the things. And that's all part of our legacy and part of who we are. And also they did very good things and very bad things. They aren't just toxic or not toxic. Right. Yeah. And they, you know, they did the whole spectrum. And sometimes it's hard to tell because it depends what perspective you're at. Because if you can be the good warrior fighting for your tribe, but the warriors from the other tribe don't think you're that great, you know, because you're coming at them. So, you know, it's hard to figure that out, but I think it is a struggle to find, you know, men who have both characteristics. But I see there's a movement happening in that all around kind of this men's space. Is that I can think of two of my friends. There's Josh Tyler, who is an MMA fighter. He fought in Bellator, and then but he has a company called Savage Gentleman, and so kind of balancing the two, because he also went to school to be a school teacher, and so he's actually very articulate and very well read and interested in, you know, more of life than just the fact that, yeah, he actually can kill you. You know, he's a black belt. He's got the being good at a man piece, but he's also a good guy, and you know, he's interested in culture and stuff. And the other one, good example conceptually is John Lavelle, and he has this thing called Warrior Poet Society, and, you know, he teaches guys how to run guns and then talks about like books and culture and all kinds of other things as well. The idea that you can be both. And that's kind of I think that's what the ultimate man really is both. You know, you have all of it. It's excellence across the board rather than just that. But I think we should probably get back into more what you do. As far as one of the things I think misconceptions or I mean, sometimes accurate perceptions that people have about men's work, it gets kind of a bad name because people see these men's groups, and if you're going to a men's group, in some way it looks to other people like you have a deficient masculinity that needs to be fixed, you know, and so there's that perception or misconception about it. And there's also, you know, put out by certain groups, and I never care about naming names of things that I don't like because that's very negative. But there's certain groups you see where it becomes these men's groups that are all about crying and kind of doing what women do, and thinking that we have to mimic what women do to, you know, be healthy. And I think that's a big mistake, and that's a big turnoff to a lot of people to actually talking about men and masculinity, because they see all these guys like, oh, these guys just are, you know, getting together and crying on each other. And you know, but one of the things that I liked about your work, from what I understand and what we've had kind of some brief discussions about it, is that there's a lot of things that are just trauma focused, where people try to find their trauma so they have something to cry about. Whereas I think you deal a lot with a lot of first responders and people with military experience and so forth, who have real trauma, like, you know, not just trauma in their head, but real trauma. Like they see horrible things and they need to process it, and that's not bad. So can you talk to me a little about that piece of what you do?
Yeah, great question. And I guess I do want to preface this by saying, again, I think they tie together. The last conversation we were having in this conversation,
sure,
we just see it through the lens of the 4 archetypes. So I typically see men are really strong in 1, 2, sometimes 3 areas, but they're deficient, like a 3-legged horse. They're deficient in 1 or more areas. So we tend to have a lot of really strong warrior type. Again, we'd claim it more in the warrior house, but that's fire, police, military, a lot of more culturally warrior strong men. But the challenge is a lot of times they're so warrior, they've shut down their emotional, let's call it emotional center.
Right.
So they've learned if you're in the field of battle, you don't have time to process the trauma from your seeing your buddy killed or whatever else happened. Or if you're a firefighter handling a job, you don't have time. You got the next call, you got the next job. So all the training revolves around handling the mission. The gap, though, in all these cultures is they never taught you how to come home. So I would also say the shortcomings are you end up with the triple D, divorced, drunk, and disabled. You end up with guys that are so mission focused that have shut down that whole other center that I would also say that's not strong either. If you're actually destroying your family house, then just overarching in one house is not a strong, powerful man. But I would say the contrast is the other house we're talking about is a lot of men are so emotionally and are using so much emotion that they don't learn the warrior fundamentals of like, get up and handle your life. Like if something's not working, change it. And so I'd say in general, we see kind of in the men's community in general is a lot of, because we still have guys that work on things, but we believe there's a sacred container, especially for strong warriors, need to feel really safe if you're going to go into an area to navigate that. So we don't share that. We're not really expressive with that. We look at that as more private and behind closed doors, if you will, to honor and keep that container sacred. But I'd say in any culture, even in the military, guys are still, they have emotion and tears. It's just not front and center as kind of the piece shown to the world. Right. And so I'd say in general, our message is, where do you need to navigate and how do you need to get there and which house is deficient? And some guys need to work on their warrior house. Some guys need to work on their, like our magician house would be being well-read and educated. Their king house is how are they communicating to the world? What's their career? What are they giving? Lover house is emotion and how they're feeling. So in general, the way I look at trauma or emotion is, where have we shut down? Because we all, I think to your point, we all have trauma. Like it comes from everybody. It's just as it's stunning you from growth. And we take more of an application of a resilient mindset where the resiliency is we're not like the military was like, they kick your ass and push you over the bridge, which you need some of that. But on the flip side, if you don't learn to feel what's going on and handle it, that rigidity, I teach these 4 levels of emotional trauma. And a lot of times we move from a level 3 to a level 4, meaning if something's broken, you need somebody to come fix it. And then like you need a doctor to place it. And if you get it fixed, your leg can actually be stronger. But a lot of times if you just go to sever it, you lose the leg. And so a lot of times if we're overly strong, our weakness is we tend to sever to move to the next. And that sever could look like relationships and our children or our families or our communities or different emotional things. So at least in my lens, I think it's all relevant. It's just, where's it focused on self? So on the flip side, somebody that focuses too much on crying or emotion, or I don't think any of it's, I don't have a judgment on it, but if that's their central theme and they're not moving into service with that, are they bringing that home? So great. If you do that, did you now transform that, move that? And are you now integrated in the world? Or is that still your story? And does that become a victim story of how you navigate the world? And I think that's where any of these pieces can become shadowed. And back to the earlier conversation, at least the frame on adolescent versus adult, adolescents focused on self still, where adults focused on service. So I think there's a lot of ways to like get in and navigate what you got to navigate. And I believe in a healthy perspective of all of them is what's most useful. Like how can we become most adaptable? If I need to go to battle, how do I step into my mission and handle my job, which is the warrior? If I need to transmute something, like the alchemy would be more that magician. Lover is family, relationships, community, my own emotions. Am I able to have awareness and identify what's going on with me and communicate and have healthy connections? And then that king archetype is career, brand, expression, communication. So I guess for me, the overall concept is, one, is something affecting us? And if it is, how do we get the proper care and support we need to handle it to then move forward? But we don't subscribe to that villain victim. There's called the Dharma triangle, villain, victim, savior. And we don't subscribe to that in our community. So we believe in full self-ownership. So, hey, whatever you need to do to handle your shit to move forward, we got you. And if you're going to use something as like if you're a victim and blaming somebody as a villain, that puts them in that adolescent psychology where they'll loop that forever. Right. So I think that's what I'm hearing you say is, I think strong masculinity can look like flexing into the houses as long as that's not your central story of why you're not getting you're not taking it home, or you're not moving into service, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that's the big problem that a lot of people have identified with American masculinity at this point, is that you have you have these guys, and it's just a totally different discussion almost. You have these guys who have the man piece. They have the being good at being a man piece in terms of, they've been, done hunting all their lives, or they've they're operators, or they've had, they're cops, first responders, all that kind of stuff. They have that piece handled, and there's a different kind of discussion that they need. And that's what you're kind of talking about, is integrating all those other pieces that they're missing. And then the majority, I think, of American men, and what the problems that we're seeing is that they are too focused on being the nice guy, and they're very soft, and they're very spoiled.
Agree.
And they haven't, most of them actually need to hear, rub some dirt on it and shut up. Like rub some dirt on it. Your problems are not that great. Like it's not that big of a deal. You are stuck in like you said, stuck in that kind of triangle, whatever. Like you're stuck in this adolescent circle of reasoning. You need to, harden the fuck up. And most American men really need to hear that. But also, obviously, that isn't the end, as you're saying. Like there are other pieces there, but I said, like, too stuck in all of the, all the realm of their emotions and feelings and places where they're comfortable. And that's, you see so many guys who are doing like the cold plunges and all the different like synthetic trials. Basically, they're creating something hard for themselves to do because the modern world hasn't actually presented them with real trauma. There are people over in Ukraine, and I don't know about what's happening really, but in theory, whatever is happening, I'm sure a lot of people are getting hurt, and they're dealing with, I had to leave my home and my family, and my place I used to live was destroyed, and I've seen death and all that. And that's real trauma that our ancient ancestors had to deal with, and like bad things. And then there's just so many people who are like, someone said something mean to me at work, and I, and it's ruined my whole world. And so they need to go through these harder situations and manufacture them. And that is very much about what modern life is. I mean, it's manufacturing things that would happen to us in a primal environment. I mean, that's why we go to the gym. Like, people didn't go to the gym before. I guess they did in ancient Greece and stuff. I mean, that's what it's named from. But, that's kind of a leisure activity. Like if you have wood that needs chopped so that your family can be warm for the winter, you're not going to the gym, you're going to chop the wood. And so that's what people were doing for most of history. But we're in a place where, we don't have to do any of those things. And so we have to manufacture it for ourselves to keep ourselves healthy, because, like a lot of my work comes from, looking at evolutionary psychology and what have we always done through history. And that the reality is that, we need these things to be mentally healthy. Like as animals, we're designed to have physical exertion and to have, hard things happen to us, and to have to go and kind of use our strength and so forth, and test our courage and all those things. We're designed to do that. And without it, we just kind of atrophy and become weird worm people. But yeah.
And one thing I will say back to that piece is, I guess a lot of my work's around the nervous system. And so becoming highly aware of the nervous system, and essentially the nervous system is moving from, it's this back of the brain. The back of the brain is that, the reptilian brain, which is reactive. And so the high awareness of, there's a lot of resiliency practices we can do, but you have to do the work. It's like, if your gas goes out in the car, you can either go to the gas station, which is kind of a pain in the ass, and put gas in and pay for it, or you could break down on the freeway and have to go figure out your gas situation. I'd say the resiliency protocols for those with heavy trauma, it's a necessity. Like for me, the way I got into it is I had a lot of my own trauma. And so I had to, and I did the old school thing at first and put it in a box, but then I started to destroy my life until I realized, like, hey, there's got to be some research. And then the science and the research started showing me, nervous system awareness. And I just got hardwired to be in these high performing states of essentially sympathetic, which is high stress states. And I got addicted to those states. And so what happens is without the resiliency, that's where all the addictions and depression and anxiety and all these mental health problems kind of spin out. And so resiliency brings us back in. I would say it's different though. We are in a different culture. I think we were raised in an older culture where different problems, different things that are happening. I would say this younger culture, it is interesting to me because we do have we're mostly older. We're like 35 to 60-year-old men. And we have all walks of life. I do say it's a little interesting, some of the younger guys coming in, but I'd say the key is having community where you have the tribe and you have like, it's one thing if you have some, let's call it some lover guys come in and they see some warriors, they're either going to adapt or they're going to go find a tribe full of lover men that are going to kind of feed the story is kind of my experience on that. And if you have the tribe, the lovers need the warriors need the lovers, the magicians need the kings. Like we need each other. And if you actually have that, there's no escaping your story because you learn like the warriors are like, oh man, I'm too rigid. I need to soften a little bit because they're representative of how I treat my spouse or my kids and then the flip side, the lovers are going, man, I need to, grow some balls. I need to get some courage. I need to actually have some healthy conflict. I need to get into some competition or, I'm too sensitive would be a great conversation for that. They need to build some strength and some power there. So you learn we need the other side of it. And that's why tribe is what I believe heals us because we learn these are my allies, not my enemies. And they have some gold to learn. But I do think there's a distinction to your point around trauma. Trauma is becoming this overused word that everybody uses. And it's a little frustrating when you see some deep embedded trauma, but it's a little tricky. The more I've studied like little T trauma and how it wires us versus big T trauma, I think are the two. Big T's like, again, death, like really hardcore things, abuse, rape. But I'd say some of the little T stuff, sometimes it has the same effects on the nervous system is the only reason I'm seeing some overlap. The big difference is, do you make it your story or do you actually do the practices and get back to life? And that's, I guess, how I interpret. Some people use that as their microphone to get on and tell the world their story of like their pain. Other people can get stuck in the self. Other people are like, here's my pain. What are the solutions so I can come back to life, come back to service, come back to integrating? And I think the universal tool is like, how do we serve? And if I can't serve my family because my pain and trauma is affecting me, then I got to do the work to learn it, to come back and serve. If somebody's using let's call it a victim story, do the work to get back in and go build something, go create something, go, right? Don't use the story to take you off. And I think that's probably what we're seeing some of is there's a lot of flavors of masculinity and some of them are, I think, perpetuating victim story, in my opinion. And I think other ones can be a little bit really hard. And I think guys need a mixture of them, but we're kind of in that middle ground of like, hey, we're going to hold you accountable. We're going to challenge you. You got to show up. We're going to call you out. And if you got some heavy trauma and pain, here's a safe place to like look at it and let it move through you so you can get back in the game of life.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there's an aspect of the culture that rewards the victim story. I mean, that's a huge thing. And that's been, like we're old enough that, we kind of watched that happen to a certain extent. In many ways, it's a reaction. So many things that like, feminism, and I mean it in the broadest sense. If you read some of the earliest feminist texts, they're actually not earliest because that's like a couple centuries ago, but the 70s, early 70s, and the modern kind of women's movement. A lot of it is and mimicked by men. Men were saying the same things then too. A lot of being angry about their shut down World War II dads. Like the boomer generation was like too shut down, and like not the boomer, the one before, the greatest generation. They were, very shut down. And these are guys who were stacking bodies in France, like my pappy, probably stabbed some people in the Pacific Theater and so they had a lot of actual trauma and we're also raised in a culture of emotional control, which I think is very healthy masculinity. It's like they did actually come home and start families and build lives and whatever. They got a lot done. They did handle it. And then, so the reaction to this was this culture of like, everything men have to do is they need to just feel and just like cry and deal with their emotions and like, blah, 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 blah. And, obviously there's some truth of that, but it was an extreme reaction. Like, let's go the whole way to the other side. And then you also saw it, and it's a little bit predatory in the way it developed in culture, because you can remember like the 80s, like the talk show culture, like the Sally Jesse Raphaels and the Oprahs and all that kind of culture emerged, where if you're a victim, you get to get on stage. You're a victim and you get to get on stage and tell your story. And then there's a whole audience of people that says, oh, like, and it's basically a group of your mommies that is out there, like, just feeling bad for you. And like, and it's addictive to people.
Yep.
And they're getting validation from being a victim. And then that's kind of snowballed into a big cultural problem, where, there is such a thing as victim status. Like you become a victim, and then you actually gain status in certain groups.
Yep.
And then anytime you're gaining status, you're kind of winning in this weird way, like you're getting all that affirmation back. And then you got, the biggest thing is being a survivor, like you survive this horrible thing. And then that becomes, like you said, your whole story. And then that's what that's about, rather than actually like, someone who's actually done something. And we've gotten to a point, I think, in American culture, but really the world culture, I think broader, is that, this victim status that you gain has kind of eclipsed legitimate accomplishment status. You get more attention from the bad things that happened to you than from the amazing things that you did. And even you see it in like, even like celebrity culture with like athletes and stuff like that. Like, like, sure, you got 3 gold medals at the Olympics, but let him talk about when his parents got divorced, because that's the real, it's really highlighted, because, humans love drama, and they love drama and gossip, and they want to, like, it's addictive and it's a product, and it's not good for us, but it's sold to us. That's why, I refuse to get on Twitter, because I feel like it's the worst thing that's ever been created in humanity in terms of how people interact with each other, because it is gossip. It's very much gossip driven. It's a whole gossip driven culture that's, like, what did this person say, or what is what can we focus on to gossip about? And that's not productive.
Yeah, it's novelty is kind of what I see. It's people. Yeah. It's like the blue crab syndrome, right? You put a bunch of blue crabs in a bucket to pull each other down. It's people that aren't willing to do the work at their own lives, so they like to focus on everybody else's. And the gossip is helpful because it validates their story of why they didn't do it, to look at why else other people are. And I think there's one thing I wanted to comment on. It's really sad. Like, we do a lot of veteran suicide prevention work, and unfortunately, the same thing runs true in those communities. It's really tough, because here's the challenge. Let's say you did get fully disabled, and let's say you and again, this is why it's not taken away from somebody that's been, truly victimized, because there was a perpetrator, something happened, you got a leg blown off, you got fully disabled, something happened. Yeah. But the challenge comes in processing that. To your point, now somebody's like, oh, they believe it as an identity. Oh, I'm this victim. And then what happens is they get addicted to that story, and then they get a lot of love and connection and community. And especially, let's say they're more lone wolves, and now they all of a sudden get connection from story. It's hard not for them to anchor that identity. And then what happens is, a lot of times they don't want to do the work to get out of it. And so they stay in these victim centers, and then they make everybody else the villain that tries to take them out of it, but they're not willing to do work. So my big frame was, hey, yes, you had this experience. Yes, you were a victim, but you're not anymore. So let's do the work to have you take some ownership to handle this and going forward. And I would also say, some of these stories they talk about, I think what people forget is, like you said, it's an Olympic athlete. They just won the Olympics, and then we're curious to know their story because they did something. Yeah. If you're just using your story, but you're not in the world doing something, right, you're just a story. But if it's like, but you've done something amazing with that, that's to me the transmutation of it, of, all right, how do I transmute this pain or this trauma or into my purpose work? Because that's really, and back to a fundamental of men's work, that's really one of the fundamentals we're doing through stories like, Iron John, where it's like using storytelling to go, hey, we all have a wound. Where did the wound come from? Instead of avoiding my wound, how do I go into my wound? How do I make peace with that? And how do I use that as my ally and actually turn that into my purpose-based work? So I'm giving the work that was my wounding. Mine came around pain, trauma, and grief. Now I do work around elevating that or turning it into purpose work instead of my victim story. How do I actually make it like, oh no, this is the work, or I'm going to serve in the world? And I think to me, that's at least what lands, because it's Jordan Peterson says this, like suffering gives with purpose, it gives meaning to suffering. And I think that's it, is like, if people just attach on the victim and get stuck in it, it's a lot of suffering. If they're actually in their victim story 24/7, like, how are you enjoying life? How are you getting the fun stuff and the juice of life? But if you can convert that into purpose, now it's worth it. And the purpose is what you focus on, right? It's like, it gets back to it. But I think people, if they knew them running that pervasive story, they're missing out, they're missing out on life. So I think it's a valid movement. And I think there's some of that happening. And I see that a lot in just the movement in general, right? I think that's how things come up. And so you see it in society in a lot of areas where very valid reason for feeling victimized, but then that victim story becomes the pervasive identity. And it's really hard to do something with that,
Yeah. And it's a shame in a sense that like, I feel like even like with the Olympic athlete kind of example, you get a +1 if you have a bad thing happen to you. Like the poor guy who never had anything bad happen to him, who's just achieving, he's at a -1 because he doesn't have a victim story. Which is unfortunate, because I think that we should strive not to have a victim story. If you have one, then you have one. But that's shouldn't be the ideal. Is that shouldn't give you a +1 in life necessarily. It is great to see. And, as an inspirational example, all these people who, have had bad things happen, whether it's your Derek White kind of characters where like, who become really fantastic athletes, they're like missing a leg. And I know another veteran who does, I used to roll with the jiu-jitsu, who was just, I'll just take my leg off. Let's go. and get good knife choking hands. So, and those guys are really, inspirational, but that's just who they were to begin with. Yep. And then they've just continued to be awesome guys, rather than like, that's the thing that caused it, I guess I'm very familiar with this in my life. I was lucky, I think, to be around, and my father had polio. And so he got a shit sandwich. Like, he's a twin, and he got polio like right before the vaccine was invented, like as a baby. And so his one leg is like shorter and kind of tight. And he's funny about it. He's made jokes that at his funeral, I'm supposed to say, because my sisters refuse, I'm supposed to say, now my dad can finally run. Just because he has a sick sense of humor, But it's kind of, so I grew up with that kind of sense of humor of like, hey, you got a sandwich in life, but that doesn't give you an excuse to like not be, to do it, to try and be a good person, like, and do good things and achieve. And like, he still became an electrician and electrical estimator, raised a family. And, it turned out he ended up being a lot more emotionally aware and a lot more, just a healthy father, I think, than his brother did. And his brother had, didn't have polio and had all the advantages in the world. But he had, I think, that kind of resiliency, I guess, that you're talking about, where he just kept going. And he's been able to be like, we had problems when I was a kid a little bit, but I mean, who wouldn't have problems with me? I'm weird. But, we had problems when I was a kid, but now he's like, as an adult, he's kind of just like father of the century in terms of, calls me once a week, harasses me, wants to know, reads my books now, like, and like wants to know what I'm doing, like all that kind of stuff, just always trying to be a helpful, influence in my life. And that's what, like you said, that's that move toward service, I think is helpful. Maybe talk a little bit more about that, because it's an interesting thing. I hear it a lot in like very Christian circles, and it rings a little different in that area. And it's because it can also it can have a little bit of a negative connotation, being a servant, like it's a tricky line. I mean, obviously I feel like with my work, at a certain point, I felt like I was called to do a thing. And, I feel like I've helped a lot of people, and that's a good thing. And that's kind of what I do in the world. But how do you see service?
Yeah. So we have and back to tribe to answer this, I'm going to come full circle. We teach we call them master maps and master tool sets because guys like tools and maps. So
Sure.
But one of the maps we teach is a tribe triangle, and that came from my partner Philip Folsom, and it's basically how do you build an honor-based tribe. And one of the ways we do it is alignment of vision, values, and mission. And so our values are growth, service, and vitality. And I'd say so. The growth is we men that typically come want to grow and get better. They want to serve, and then they also vitality is a new one we added because if you just grow and serve all the time, you get burned out, and so you can't actually serve your mission unless you take time to do active recovery or some time for self-reflection and solace or different areas that we've now built in vitality. But the way we look at it is the adolescent first is just trying to serve the self, and we use different stories like Iron John to talk about a lot of metaphoric ways of relating to this. But like one is 3 days of the sacred spring, where first you're just in pain. There's some trauma and you're bleeding out. So a lot of times you're bleeding out through different ways. It could be numbing, addictions, workaholism, some way that's kind of an unknown or unaware place that we start. And we're just trying to dip our finger to like stop the bleeding. And then once we become aware of it, we then say, oh, what are these practices I have to do? And we move into like practices or habits or rituals or resiliency protocols, kind of is how we frame it, of like, oh, I got to do my breath work and my meditation and my writing and working out at the gym and training and spending time with community and family or whatever I have to do in order to keep myself from bleeding, right? I actually fill myself back up again. But we get so focused on that we're like kind of too self-focused and we forget to actually go put our mission into the world. And so the third phase is like, if we've done all this healing, all this self-reflection, how do we now stop focusing on self to take that and do something with it and to give that? And so for us, it's like the 3 levels of moving first from real adolescent would be, which I still struggle with in different areas. I'm learning like, oh, I catch myself. They're like, oh, here's my adolescent behavior where I'm focused on pleasure is like the first area. Like, oh, this feels better than that. I don't want to be uncomfortable. So I'm going to do this little thing over here that feels pleasurable for the moment.
Sure.
Versus an adult man would say, hey, I'm willing to sacrifice now for the long-term game over here. So, sacrificing pleasure for happiness is the first tier, and then being able to sacrifice happiness for purpose. And I'd say that's where the real service conversation comes into is purpose and meaning are what I believe is what we're here for. And so when I'm actually aligned in serving, not from a martyr service. Martyr service is what we call spiritually bypassing, where somebody's actually trying to, they're unavoiding and they're fronting with service, but it's not authentic service. So it's like, there's a distinction there, but true service would be, hey, I've done my work. I'm realizing who I am. I'm now not going into my relationship to get, I'm going into my relationship to serve. I'm not navigating the world to take, let's call it. I'm actually adding value, and it mimics nature. If you look at nature, everything in nature serves at a higher level. So how do we start to mimic that where we can grow and evolve enough where we're contributing to life instead of taking from life is the big concept on it. And that service can look like, hey, what's my intention behind it? Am I doing this to get or to give? And again, that's back to, there's no judgment. It's, oh, adolescent needs it, so it takes it. Adult can generate it, so it has more to give. And so I'd say that's the evolutionary process to going, hey, like, I know you're transforming your body as well. We're transforming body, but what finally moved the needle for me is I converted it to brand. When I was doing it for me, or I was doing it to get the right type of partner or these different other areas, it never worked. When I was like, hey, if I'm going to be in men's work, I honestly dismiss guys who don't take care of their body, or like, I'm like, you're in men's work and you a fucking fat piece of shit. Like, not just to be critical, but why am I going to listen to you if you can't even do this basic fundamental? And once I went, holy shit, like, how can I even own this if I'm not even in shape? And me converting that to service, like, oh, I can't be in this space if I'm inauthentic. So own your shit. And once I did it for that, it wasn't about me anymore. It was about who are the men that I have these valuable maps and tools to share with. And if I can't own it, I can't serve. So I was able to get the result in my life once I converted it to service, not self. And I think the same thing translates into purpose and career and relationship and all these other areas. Once we do it to serve others versus ourselves, we get more ammo, more energy, more power, if you will, which goes back to the honor-based culture, right? The honor-based is, we do a lot of high accountability where guys work on goals in the different, quadrants. We call them Grails goals because we just make it fun and, like going to get the Grail.
Yeah.
But really, we have them in roundtables of guys that actually help each other and hold each other accountable. And the irony is, we'll always do more for somebody else than we will for ourselves. So you and I are working on let's say you and I were meeting every week and we started telling each other what our goals were. Well, I know I'm going to show up every week and I'm going to have to tell you, did I do it? But I'll do it more for you than I will for me sometimes. So if we can hold each other accountable to help each other accomplish our goals, what actually moves the needle is I'm now going to do my stuff so I don't let you down. And that's what actually starts to move the needle is wow, I'm actually going to go get my results to support you. Right. Which goes back to like, we call them honor-based cultures, cultures. And how do we create honor-based cultures in tribes of men who are in those honor-based cultures?
Yeah. I mean, your honor generally as a man is your reputation among a certain group of men. And it goes into shame as well to a certain extent. I think shame's a big motivator, and that's okay. It's okay to be do a thing because I don't want to be ashamed of myself. Like in the honor group, I don't want to be ashamed that I didn't do it. Yeah. Like I just, I just did some bodybuilding stuff, and that's part of the reason why I hired a coach. Is like I have to send pictures of myself in my underwear to this dude who's jacked like once a week, and I don't want to be ashamed about. I don't want to be like, I look worse. Yeah, I can't control what I put in my mouth, therefore I look worse. Yep. And you don't want to do that. So you're using that shame gets like a bad rep or whatever, but it can be a powerful motivator. You're using that shame to harness that to kind of keep yourself in line, because it's your reputation among in this case just my reputation with that guy, but really then a bigger thing, because like I did the same thing as far as men's being a guy who speaks about masculinity. Yeah, I can't do that. If people do, you have like the university professor guy who just looks like whatever and then like lectures about the idea. But I was like, well, if I'm going to talk about this and say that men should do a thing, I should at least try to do it. And so, I started, I'm like, I guess I've never been punched in the face. I guess I need to go learn boxing, and do that. And then that changes you. And then like, obviously the physical piece, as far as like the way you look. Yeah. Cause you shouldn't respect a dude because it's a sign of low self-respect, that they haven't invested in themselves and that they don't care about what they look like or whatever. It's interesting, but yeah, you need that accountability with all of it. And especially if you're doing anything in a public way, part of it is it's a public accountability. If I just start doing whatever and turn into a slob again, like no one will ever care what I have to say again. So it's very important, I think, to represent what you say that you stand for. I mean, that's integrity, right?
And it's also, I believe, integration. And I think it kind of full circles back to what we talked about in the beginning is like, what is integrated men? And integrated men is like whatever we're speaking to, we're actively working on applying that to our lives, right? And if you're going, I'm not just saying, hey, I want to get better. You're like, no, where am I weak? Let me look at the areas. Is it diet? Is it fitness? Is it the right train? Like, okay, let me get in these areas. Let me solve them, put a plan in place and be held accountable to get a result, right? And then when you do, it's amazing, right? And then you can now help other people. It's like that metaphor of teaching people to fish. You can't teach somebody to fish unless you know how to do it. So I think as a men, we're responsible to elevate the different areas of our lives that we're weak in. And I guess that's also what translates the resiliency conversation is sometimes the areas we're uncomfortable, old school masculinity would be like, no go zone. But the way we like to look at it is, well, let me get in there. Because I'd say that's which is harder. If a strong man does what's harder, is it easier just to go no go zone? Or is it easier to go, let me get into this messy area that doesn't make any sense and figure out what's not working, why it's not working, get the proper support, tool sets, knowledge, frameworks, so I can succeed at this area and now go from not knowing to like, dominating this area. And then I can teach it. And again, back to service. Now I can give this because I now know how to do it and I can give it and share it, and I think that's what allows us to grow, move from, I guess, the stages of like a young man who's learning to then an integrated man and then an elder eventually, where we're like, hey, how do I now help the tribe? Because I got all this elder wisdom that I can bring back to the tribe and share. And I think that's where, again, it's just tribe is so needed. We've lost our way, I think, on a lot of times where, like, imagine what there's tribe where there's elders and all these different, like, a lot of times everybody's siloed and everybody's isolated in their houses with the garages shut and don't even know their neighbors. And like, we're not in tribe anymore. So we want to bring back that aspect of tribe around shared values. And we may have guys of, in our community, we have guys with different political backgrounds. We have guys of different, the whole vaccine conversation, but because we align on similar values, we're able to stay in the tribe. And I would actually say we get better with different perspectives. I think when you're on your own island and everybody believes the same thing, everybody subscribes to that tribe mentality. But when you have a community with totally different perspectives, but similar alignment, you can have really diverse intellectual conversations to get better and go, I now understand this perspective more. And you actually grow more because you have more compassion, more growth, more awareness. So yeah, really interesting.
It's a tricky thing because there's even tactically speaking, there's the if you have like an information bubble where you're not actually taking in new information all the time, you're the tribe that dies. Yeah. You like, whoa, they invented arrows over here, buddy. You screwed up. Yeah. If you just keep everything out and are totally isolationist about things. But then again, it's like, I think also too, it's like, if you're about everything, then sometime at some point you're about nothing, so it becomes it is a little bit of a hard thing as to where to draw lines. And I think in America, really, we're going to be at a place where a lot of different people are going to have to be like, do a hard no on certain things because we're becoming more and more fractured. And I think that's probably healthy. Things need those things in the way that, like people need to deal with their trauma. America probably needs to deal with all of its internal conflict and like sometimes a marriage has to break up and all, there are things that need to happen. But anyway, I think this is a really good conversation. I really think you have a really measured and mature outlook, and without, like I said, being the foo-foo kind of like whatever piece that a lot of things get attributed to this. So I really encourage, I think, people to go and check out what you're doing because I think a lot of men could use some of that help. And I think that you're kind of presenting it in the right way rather than in this kind of predatory, like, tell me more about your feelings, like kind of way, which that's a thing. For sure. And there's ulterior motives and whatever. It seems like you're coming from it from a really healthy perspective and so forth. So why don't you tell everybody where they can find you and anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just say, we call it battle tested. Everything we use is science backed, and then we apply it before we create frameworks and tools around it. So, and mostly on us because we need it. And we're walking with guys to go through it. But one, either me personally, Joshua Michael Wenner. So just my website, Instagram, Facebook, anything around that, or the different communities, K4men.com is our men's work community, or the veteran first responder work is valorresiliency.com.
All right. And I think that's really needed. And I think, I have a lot of guys in the military and so forth that follow me. And I think that, that something like that might be the right thing for some of them. So anyway, again, thanks, man. Thanks for the talk, and I'll get this up to YouTube soon.
Awesome. Such a fun conversation. Always appreciate it. Yeah. So fun.